The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp as glass, her gavel resting still but heavy. Across from her stood a young man with trembling hands and eyes that had forgotten how to rest. His name was Ethan Moore. "I'm not a bad son," he said, voice cracking just enough to sound human. The words hung in the air, fragile and stubborn, like something that wanted to be believed but wasn't sure it could be. The audience shifted. Even Judge Judy paused. There was no anger in her stare, just curiosity, the kind that comes before a storm. "Then help me understand," she said, calmly. "Because from where I'm sitting, you let your mother suffer while you walked away." The crowd murmured. Ethan's jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward the floor, then back up. Not at her, but somewhere past her, as if looking for someone who wasn't there anymore. "I didn't walk away," he whispered. "She told me to." Judge Judy's brow arched. "She told you to stop caring for her?" He swallowed hard. The words didn't come easy. She said she didn't want to be my burden anymore. A collective sigh rippled through the courtroom, but Judy didn't let it soften her. "And you believed that," she pressed. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His fingers clenched into fists. Somewhere in the back row, a woman gasped softly. Maybe a mother, maybe someone who knew what it felt like to be left. The camera caught every twitch, every flicker of pain across his face. Friends, you could feel it. Something deeper was hiding beneath his words. This wasn't a case about negligence. It was about love, pride, and something that had gone terribly wrong. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice lower now, almost tender. "Mr. Moore, I've seen bad sons. You don't look like one. But if you're not, then tell me why we're here." Ethan looked up, his eyes glistening. "Because I couldn't save her." And just like that, every whisper stopped. Nobody moved. Even Judy's pen froze above her notepad. The truth, whatever it was, had just begun to surface. Ethan Moore was 27 years old, but his eyes carried the weariness of someone twice his age. He wasn't the kind of man people noticed on the street, quiet, plain clothes, shoulders slightly bent. But behind that stillness was a lifetime of noise. He grew up in a small apartment in Queens, just him and his mother, Helen. His father had left when he was 6. One morning, the man who had promised to come right back after work simply never did. For years, Ethan remembered the smell of that morning, burnt toast, wet socks on the heater, and his mother's trembling hands as she packed his lunch anyway, pretending nothing had changed. Helen became everything: mother, father, protector, teacher. She worked double shifts at a diner, came home past midnight smelling of coffee and bleach, and still made time to ask Ethan about school. She'd smile through exhaustion and say, "Promise me one thing, baby. Don't let the world make you hard." He never did. He grew into the kind of man who fixed other people's problems before his own. But life doesn't care how good your heart is. It tests it anyway. At 24, Ethan's world began to shrink around bills, hospital forms, and late-night phone calls that started with, "I'm sorry, but..." Helen had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The doctors said she needed rest, proper medication, and supervised care. Ethan tried to juggle 2 jobs, wanted an auto shop by day, another cleaning offices at night, but the numbers never added up. When Helen's health worsened, he had to make the decision no child wants to make, moving her into an assisted living facility. "Just until you get on your feet," the nurse had said. But weeks turned into months, then months into a year. The bills piled high and guilt piled higher. Ethan sold his car, his guitar, even the TV his mother had given him for Christmas. Still the payments fell behind. He stopped eating out, stopped meeting friends. Every paycheck vanished before he could catch his breath. And then came the letter, thick, official, and cruelly polite. The facility was suing him for unpaid medical costs totaling more than he made in a year. They accused him of neglect and abandonment of responsibility. Abandonment. The very word that defined the wound he'd spent his whole life trying not to repeat. But there was one thing even more painful than the lawsuit itself. His mother refused to testify against him. The facility's lawyer claimed it was because she was too ashamed, but Judge Judy saw it differently. Too ashamed? She had murmured during the hearing. Or too loyal? The camera had cut to Ethan then, head down, fingers trembling, trying to steady his breathing. Helen, fragile but proud, had sent a note to the court through her nurse. It wasn't a defense. It was just one sentence, written in shaky handwriting. "My son has done more for me than I ever deserved." That letter, the judge later said everything and nothing all at once. Behind the legal arguments was a story, one of sacrifice hidden behind silence. Ethan hadn't stopped visiting his mother. In fact, he'd been there every night, sometimes after midnight, bringing her the same soup she used to make him as a boy. But because the payments stopped, the facility assumed he'd abandoned her. What they didn't know was that Helen herself had called the billing department weeks before and said, "Please remove my son's name from the account. He's struggling enough." She didn't tell Ethan she had done it. She didn't want him to feel the weight of her care becoming his cage. Now that decision had brought him here, standing in Judge Judy's courtroom, being accused of neglecting the very woman he'd given his life to protect. He could have hired a lawyer, but he didn't. "If I'm going to be judged," he told the clerk quietly before the hearing, "I'll let her see the truth herself." And now, under those harsh lights, with a nation of viewers watching, Ethan's truth was on trial. Was he a careless son, or just a man trying to survive in a system that punished compassion? Only Judge Judy would decide. But before she did, she would peel back every layer of Ethan Moore, until even he couldn't hide from his own heart. Judge Judy adjusted her glasses and looked straight at Ethan. The courtroom was packed, yet it felt like there were only two people in the room, a judge searching for truth and a son running from it. The representative from the assisted care facility stood stiffly at the podium, holding a stack of papers that seemed to weigh more than facts should. "Your Honor, this case is simple. Mr. Ethan Moore entered into a contractual obligation to cover his mother's care. He defaulted, disappeared for several months, and refused to communicate with our billing department. We reached out repeatedly. There was no response. His mother's condition worsened under emotional distress caused by his absence." Judge Judy turned to Ethan. "Is that true? Did you disappear?" He took a long breath, his voice low. "No, ma'am. I didn't disappear. I just stopped answering their calls." "Why?" "I didn't have the money," he said finally. "And I couldn't bear hearing them talk about her like she was a bill." "You said you couldn't pay, so what did you sell before you stopped paying?" "My car, my tools, my mother's old sewing machine." His voice faltered. "Even my guitar. She gave it to me when I was 15. "How many jobs were you working?" "2, he said. "Day shift at the garage, night cleaning offices." "Did you ever visit your mother during this time?" His answer came without hesitation. "Every night." "Mr. Moore, the facility has logs. They say you weren't listed as a visitor after February." "That's because I stopped signing in. They started turning me away." "They turned you away?" "They said I needed to clear the balance before I could visit her again." The courtroom fell completely still. Even the clerk looked up from her paperwork. "And what did you do then?" "I started waiting in the parking lot," he said, trembling. "I'd get off work past midnight, sit in my car outside her window, and just watch the light in her room. Sometimes she'd wave, sometimes she was asleep, but I needed to know she was okay. Something changed in the room. People shifted uncomfortably. Some wiped their eyes. Judy leaned forward. What happened next? She started calling me less. Then one day the nurse told me she'd asked to remove my contact number. Said it was for my own good. For your own good? Why? Because she knew I was drowning. He told me to stop paying. She said, "Save yourself, Ethan. I'm old, but you're young. Don't waste your life trying to fix mine." I told her I couldn't do that. I promised Dad I'd never leave her. Your father? He left us when I was a kid. I wanted to give her a better life. A house with a porch. A place where she could sit in the sun and not worry about bills or pain. But all I gave her was stress. All I did was make her watch me fall apart, trying to keep her alive. I couldn't fix it, he said, staring at the floor. I couldn't fix her heart, her pain, or the life she lost trying to raise me. Every time she smiled, I could see what it cost her. And I kept thinking, if I was stronger, smarter, richer, maybe she'd still be proud of me. I just wanted her to be proud of me. Ethan, she said quietly, your mother didn't need a mansion to be proud. She needed a son who showed up, and you did that, even when the world told you to stop. He shook his head. But I failed her in the end. I stopped paying. They took her off the list because of me. No, she said firmly. They took you off because she loved you enough to set you free. You think that's failure? That's love, Ethan. That's what it looks like when someone who's given everything still tries to give one last thing, your future. She always told me I was her reason to smile. And now she can't even remember me some days. When I visit, she looks at me like I'm a stranger. I sit there, holding her hand, waiting for her to come back, even for a second. And when she doesn't, I just pretend she does. She knows, Judy said softly. Even if she can't say it now, she knows. He looked up, eyes red. How can you be sure? Because mothers never forget love, she said. He pressed a hand to his heart. I kept thinking I was supposed to be strong for her, he said softly. But I wasn't. I was scared. Every night I'd pray she'd sleep through the pain. Sometimes I'd pray I wouldn't wake up just so I didn't have to see her fading again. You didn't fail your mother, Ethan. You honored her, in the only way you knew how. He looked up, a faint, painful smile forming. You really think she'd forgive me? I think, Judy said gently, she already has. You raised a man who didn't run from love, she added softly. That's her victory. Judge Judy lifted her pen, but she didn't write a thing. Mr. Moore, in all my years on this bench, I've seen people use excuses to escape responsibility. I've also seen love that refuses to surrender. Yours is the latter. She turned to the facility representative. You came here with papers proving a debt, but what this young man has paid can't be written in numbers. He paid in hours, in exhaustion, in the quiet kind of love that doesn't demand applause. This is not a case of abandonment. It's a case of devotion misinterpreted by a system that measures care in dollars. Therefore, I am dismissing the financial claim in its entirety. The facility will close this suit immediately. Any outstanding balance is to be written off. Mr. Moore is absolved of all liability. The gavel echoed like freedom. She turned back to him. Go live your life. That's the best way to thank her. He nodded, eyes full of quiet relief. As he walked toward the exit, Judy looked down at the note Helen had written. My son has done more for me than I ever deserved. She smiled faintly. She was right. The camera caught that final image, the gavel resting still, The note beside it, sunlight spilling across the bench. A son's love is not neglect. It's devotion misunderstood. The courtroom lights dimmed. For most people, another case had ended, but for Ethan Moore, something far deeper had begun. That afternoon, he walked through the familiar corridors of the assisted care facility. Nurses nodded gently as he passed. He didn't carry flowers, just peace. He entered her room. Sunlight painted golden lines across her bed. Helen lay resting, her breathing soft. Ethan sat beside her, reached for her hand, frail, warm, familiar, and whispered, "Mom, it's over." Her fingers twitched slightly, as if she understood. Friends, maybe that's the truth Judge Judy wanted all of us to see. That love isn't measured by money or perfection. It's measured by the moments you refuse to stop showing up. Ethan didn't walk out of that courtroom a rich man, but he walked out free. Free from guilt, from judgment, from the voice that said he wasn't enough. Because sometimes being there is enough. The narrator's voice softens. Sometimes the world doesn't see the quiet heroes, the sons, daughters, fathers, and mothers who keep giving long after they have nothing left to give. But maybe that's where love is most real. In the silence, in the waiting, in the promise that says, "I'll stay." So, friends, if this story touched your heart, share it. Share it for every parent who sacrificed in silence. Share it for every child who tried their best, even when the world didn't notice. And maybe, just maybe, share it for yourself. Because at the end of it all, love is the one verdict that never expires. And as Judge Judy once said with quiet grace, "Your mother raised a man who didn't run from love. That's her victory." Next time, a daughter's secret letter stops Judge Judy mid-sentence and changes everything. He stayed by her side long after the cameras stopped recording. The nurses dimmed the lights, the hum of the machines softened, and the world outside went back to being loud and indifferent. But in that small, quiet room, time slowed down just enough for love to breathe. Ethan traced the veins on his mother's frail hand, remembering the hands that once wiped his tears and packed his lunches, the hands that worked themselves raw so he could have one more chance. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than apology ever could. The sunlight faded behind the blinds, and as the shadows lengthened, he thought of Judge Judy's words echoing in his mind. "Your mother raised a man who didn't run from love." Maybe that was what all of this had been about. Not punishment, not forgiveness, but love refusing to let go even when it hurt. He lifted his hand gently, kissed it once, and whispered, "Mom, I kept my promise." Friends, maybe that's what real devotion looks like. Not grand gestures or perfect endings, but showing up again and again, even when nobody's watching. It's the quiet strength of those who choose compassion over comfort, sacrifice over applause. Some people will call it foolishness. Others will call it weakness. But those who've ever truly loved someone, a parent, a child, a friend, they'll recognize it instantly. It's the kind of love that doesn't make sense until you've carried it yourself. So ask yourself, if you were in Ethan's shoes, would you have done the same? Would you stand by the one who raised you, even when the world told you to let go? Share this story, if it reminded you of someone who never gave up on you, someone who carried you through the storm without ever asking for credit. Because stories like Ethan's remind us that sometimes the hardest kind of strength is the gentle kind, the kind that keeps loving, even when it's breaking. As Ethan left the facility that evening, the hallway lights flickered in warm tones. Outside, the city buzzed like nothing had changed, but inside him, everything had. He wasn't the same man who walked into that courtroom. He was lighter, quieter, at peace. And somewhere miles away in a quiet hospital bed, Helen Moore slept with a faint smile on her lips, as if she'd heard her son's words across the distance. Because love, even unspoken, always finds its way home. Next time, a daughter's secret letter stops Judge Judy mid-sentence and changes everything. And that, friends, is where this story leaves us. Not in a courtroom, but in a heartbeat. Judge Judy's bench is empty now. The cameras are off, yet her words linger like a whisper through every family that's ever faced love, loss, and guilt all at once. Ethan's story wasn't about winning or losing. It was about remembering that the greatest victories are the ones we don't announce. They're the quiet ones. The hand you hold, the sacrifice no one sees, the forgiveness you give without needing to hear it back. Maybe somewhere out there tonight, there's another Ethan sitting in a hospital chair wondering if he's done enough. Maybe there's another mother somewhere still trying to protect her child from the weight of love. And maybe you, watching this right now, feel that ache, that mix of pride and pain that only family can create. Hold on to it, because that ache means you've loved deeply enough to hurt. It means you've lived. If this story moved you, share it with someone who once stood by you when you didn't deserve it. Remind them that love, real love, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stays. And as the lights fade on this episode, Judge Judy's voice echoes one last time. Calm, certain, but filled with rare tenderness. Your mother raised a man who didn't run from love. That's her victory. And that's yours. The screen fades to black. The music continues under the final frame. The text lingers, the music slowly thinning until it's just the sound of breath. Then a narrator's voice returns, low, calm, like an afterthought that stays with you long after the story ends.